She whispered, "Your dad can't know." But the way her eyes searched mine. I knew secrets weren't the only thing we were hiding. I still remember the first time I noticed her differently. Not as my friend's mom, not as the woman who offered snacks when we came over, but as someone whose presence seemed to alter the entire air around me. It was late afternoon when I walked into their house. The light slanted low through the curtains, filling the living room with that golden haze you only get at the end of summer days. She was there, adjusting a stack of magazines on the coffee table. Something about the way her fingers moved, delicate, deliberate, made me pause in the doorway longer than I should have. She turned, and her eyes met mine. Hazel, with a tired softness, like someone who carried more inside her than she ever said out loud. She smiled, not forced, not overly bright, just warm, the kind of smile that seemed meant only for the person standing in front of her. "Hey," she said, her voice low, even, carrying the faint trace of comfort you get when someone truly notices you. "Your friend's upstairs, but you can wait here if you'd like." I nodded, though I barely registered the words. My attention was drawn to the small details, the faint shine of a wedding band still worn on her hand, the way a strand of black hair had slipped free and rested against her cheek. She brushed it back behind her ear, and for the briefest moment, her eyes lingered on mine again. I sat on the edge of the sofa, pretending to look around, but my focus kept drifting back to her. The scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen, mixing with the faint perfume she wore, something subtle, floral, not overpowering. She crossed the room slowly, almost cautious, and asked how my studies were going. Her tone was casual, but her gaze was steady. There was no rush in her questions, no distraction like most adults gave when they only half listened. She really wanted to hear me. I answered, fumbling more than usual, because it felt strange to be this aware of her. I shouldn't have been. She was older, graceful, out of reach in every possible way. But awareness doesn't ask for permission, it arrives quietly, and once it's there, you can't unsee it. As my friend finally came downstairs, breaking the moment, I caught myself exhaling as though I'd been holding my breath. That was the first time I realized, something about her unsettled me, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it to stop. The next time I came over, it was quieter than usual. My friend had run upstairs to grab something, leaving me alone in the kitchen with her. It was a small, ordinary moment, yet it carried a weight I couldn't explain. The kettle whistled softly on the stove. Steam curled into the air, carrying with it the rich smell of coffee. She moved with an ease that made every gesture feel deliberate, the way she reached for mugs from the cabinet, the way her wrist turned as she poured water. I found myself watching her without meaning to, tracing the small details that suddenly felt larger than life. She caught me looking and gave a half-smile. "Coffee?" she asked, her tone casual, though something in her eyes suggested she knew I'd been paying closer attention than I should have. "Sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. When she slid the mug across the counter, her hand brushed against mine. It lasted no more than a second, but the warmth of her skin lingered as if it had imprinted itself. She didn't pull away quickly, nor did she acknowledge it, as though the contact was both accidental and intentional at the same time. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. She asked about my classes, about what I wanted to do with my life. Not the polite kind of questions adults usually asked, but ones that felt rooted in genuine curiosity. I could tell by the way she tilted her head slightly, her chin resting against her palm, that she was listening. Really listening. I found myself saying more than I planned, about the pressure I felt, the uncertainty. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice too quickly. She just let the words rest in the air, like she was making space for them. "You're thoughtful," she said at last, almost as if she hadn't meant to say it out loud. Her gaze held mine a second longer than usual, and for a heartbeat, it felt like there was something unspoken floating between us. The sound of footsteps upstairs broke the moment. She straightened slightly, lifting her mug to her lips as though she'd said nothing unusual. But as my friend came back into the kitchen, laughing about something on his phone, I noticed she hadn't stopped looking at me, not fully. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a cup of coffee. Just a conversation. Just a moment that shouldn't matter. And yet, it did. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind where the world feels like it's holding its breath. My friend had gone out with others, leaving me to wait on the porch until he returned. I didn't mind. The wooden swing creaked softly beneath me as I sat there, watching the glow of the street lamps scatter against the pavement. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain that had passed earlier. Crickets hummed in the background, a steady rhythm filling the silence. And then I heard the door open behind me. She stepped out, her cardigan pulled around her shoulders, her hair falling loose in the dim light. She looked at me with that gentle half-smile, the one that seemed to carry both kindness and restraint. "Mind if I sit?" she asked softly. I shook my head, sliding over slightly. The porch swing shifted under our combined weight, the space between us small but careful. For a while, we just listened to the night. Eventually, she broke the silence. "You think a lot for someone your age," she said, her tone thoughtful. "Most boys don't spend time sitting still like this. They're restless." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm restless in different ways." That made her laugh quietly, but the sound carried a sadness too. She glanced toward the street, her fingers tracing the wooden armrest. And then she said something I hadn't expected. "Sometimes I forget who I used to be before all of this." Her voice was low, almost like she wasn't talking to me but to herself. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the vulnerability in her eyes made me hesitate. So instead, I said gently, "You don't seem like someone who's forgotten much at all." She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes searching mine as though testing how much truth I could hold. And for a heartbeat, I thought she might tell me everything. But then she shook her head slightly, pulling her cardigan tighter. Her voice softened, barely above a whisper. "Your dad can't know." The words landed heavier than the night air around us. They weren't just a reminder of boundaries. They were a confession, an acknowledgement that whatever this was between us, it wasn't nothing. I nodded, though my chest tightened. I didn't fully understand what line we had crossed, or if we had crossed it at all. But I knew this, there was something she was guarding, and for the first time, I wanted to be the one she trusted enough to share it with. After that evening on the porch, something shifted. It wasn't announced, it wasn't spoken, but it lived in the space between us. Every glance seemed to last a heartbeat too long, every small gesture carried a quiet electricity. I noticed it in the living room one evening, when we all sat together watching a movie. The TV flickered against the walls, filling the silence with voices and music. My friend was sprawled across the floor with his phone, barely paying attention, but she and I sat side by side on the couch. The cushions dipped between us, our knees just close enough that the warmth radiated. I couldn't focus on the screen, not when I was so aware of the space we weren't quite filling. At one point, she leaned forward to pick up the remote. Her sleeve brushed against my arm, and though it was nothing more than fabric against fabric, my skin tingled as though I'd been touched directly. I tried not to react, but she glanced at me, the faintest smile ghosting across her lips before she turned back toward the screen. The tension wasn't always physical. It was in the way she thanked me after I carried in groceries, her hand resting on my shoulder just a moment too long before she pulled away. It was in the evenings when I caught her looking at me from across the room, her expression unreadable, until she quickly shifted her gaze. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was just in my head. But then there were moments that convinced me otherwise. Like the night I stood at the sink rinsing a glass, and she walked past me, close enough that her hand grazed mine briefly. She didn't apologize. She didn't even acknowledge it. She just let the contact linger as though it were natural, though nothing about it felt casual to me. Inside, I wrestled with the contradiction. She had warned me. She had drawn the line. Your dad can't know. But everything about the way she carried herself near me whispered the opposite, that she felt this same pull, that she was fighting it too. And so, we sat in this strange rhythm, near but not too near, speaking but never naming what we both felt. Every silence was filled with the question neither of us dared to ask. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where time seemed to slow down. My friend had gone out for a while, leaving me to wait in the living room. I wasn't surprised when she appeared, carrying a folded blanket over one arm. She set it on the couch, smoothing the fabric with careful hands, though there was no need. I looked up at her, ready with something casual to say, but she spoke first. "You've been coming around a lot lately," she said lightly, though her eyes betrayed more curiosity than the words carried. "Maybe I just like the company," I replied, half teasing, half serious. Her lips curved into a smile, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she lowered herself into the armchair opposite me. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the air filled only by the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and rested her chin on her hand. "You know," she began slowly, her voice softer now, "you're nothing like the boys your age. Most of them, they don't look at people the way you do. They don't listen." Her words startled me, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. With honesty. With admiration she hadn't meant to reveal. She blinked as if realizing too late she'd crossed some invisible line. I could have let it go. I could have laughed it off, changed the subject. But something inside me wouldn't allow that. I leaned forward slightly, my hands resting on my knees, and answered before I could stop myself. "And you're nothing like the women I've known." The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, wide at first, then softening into something unguarded. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock, the rhythm of our breaths falling into the same pace. It wasn't a confession, not exactly. But it was close enough that we both understood what hovered between the words. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of the chair, as though holding herself back. Then she broke the gaze, looking down with a quiet smile that carried both warmth and restraint. Nothing more was said. But in that silence, in that lingering look, I knew, we were no longer pretending this was just coincidence. Something had begun, even if neither of us dared to name it. The rain came late that night, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the windows like a quiet insistence. I was about to leave, pulling on my jacket in the hallway, when she appeared from the living room. The dim lamp behind her cast a halo of light across her shoulders, and the tired gentleness in her face made me pause. "You don't have to rush," she said softly. "It's pouring out there." I shrugged lightly. "I don't mind the rain." She stepped closer, close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, warm, familiar, a fragrance I had come to associate only with her. She tilted her head, studying me for a moment that stretched too long. "You always say that," she whispered, almost as though she wasn't talking about the weather anymore. I smiled faintly, uncertain of what to do with the weight in her eyes. I turned toward the door, hand reaching for the knob. And then, her fingers touched my wrist. It was the lightest contact, barely there, yet it stopped me cold. Her hand was warm, steady, but trembling just slightly, as though caught between holding on and letting go. I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. Her voice came low, careful, almost breaking, "It can't happen." Her words said one thing, but her eyes betrayed the rest, longing, fear, and something softer, something she hadn't let herself show until now. I felt my chest tighten, the air too heavy to breathe. Slowly, I turned back toward her, my wrist still beneath her touch. My answer came before I could think, "Neither will my heart." The silence that followed was filled only with the sound of rain against glass. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she let it rest there a moment longer, her thumb brushing ever so slightly against my skin. For an instant, we leaned closer without meaning to, the space between us narrowing, the world beyond the two of us disappearing. I could see every detail in her eyes, the hesitation, the desire, the war she was fighting within herself. And then she stopped. She drew back just enough, her hand slipping from my wrist as though it cost her something to let go. We both stood frozen, our breaths shallow, trembling with everything left unsaid. It was almost nothing. And yet it was everything. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the air crisp and clean, the kind of quiet that follows after rain. I found myself back on their porch, the wooden boards still damp beneath my shoes. She was already there, sitting on the swing with a mug in her hands, her cardigan wrapped loosely around her shoulders. When she saw me, she didn't startle, didn't turn away. She simply shifted slightly, enough to make room beside her. I sat down, careful not to let the swing creak too loudly. For a while, neither of us spoke. The chains of the swing groaned softly as we rocked, back and forth, in sync with the silence. The morning light fell gently across her face. There was something softer in her expression now, not the guarded look she usually wore, not the tension of the night before, but a quiet acceptance. She sipped her coffee, then set the mug down on the railing. Her hands folded in her lap, and without looking at me, she said, "Some things, they don't need to be explained." Her words carried more weight than they appeared to. I didn't answer right away. I just let them sink in, watching the way her fingers curled slightly, the way her shoulders rose and fell with a steady breath. Finally, I let my hand rest gently over hers. I didn't squeeze, didn't press, just placed it there, as if asking a question. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers shifted slowly until they intertwined with mine. The warmth of her touch was steady, calm, as though in this simple act we had both agreed on something unspoken. I looked at her then. She met my gaze, her eyes searching mine not for answers, but for reassurance. I nodded slightly, and in that small exchange, it felt as if we had promised each other something. Not forever, not even tomorrow, just this moment. The porch was quiet except for the sound of birds beginning to stir, the world slowly waking around us. But between us, it felt like time had stilled. In the end, there were no grand declarations, no stolen kisses, no reckless confessions. Only silence, only closeness, only the truth we both carried quietly in our hearts. And as I sat there beside her, our hands hidden in the shadows between us, I understood, some stories are never meant to be told out loud. They are meant to be lived in the quiet, where two hearts can recognize each other without needing a single word.